That's the vote. Okay. So this is the second in the series of our talks about how change happens, and I'm going to introduce today my good friend Richard Haggerty. If I was to call you an NLP expert, is that the right terminology, or is there a kind of a different title that you're working through?
I'm always cautious about the use of the word expert, only because I love I always love to have like the sort of beginner's mind, and I think that's really helpful. So I would say now these days I've kind of my area of interest is really is about different types of change, but using, shall we say, expertise from hypnotherapy, from hypnosis, different forms of neurolinguistic programming, and taking that into coaching. So taking models that have, shall we say, been perhaps used or perhaps used in one area and combining them and making them simpler, more streamlined, using those principles elsewhere. But for technical purposes, yeah, absolutely, that's fine.
Great. Okay. So the theme of the talks that we're doing is how change happens. And here at the Living Room, obviously, we are an addictions treatment service, and so we're all about helping change to happen.
Nice.
But of course, there are as many sort of different views on change as there are practitioners. So simply today, I'm going to throw the floor open to you to talk about how you see change happening in individuals and how we as practitioners can work to facilitate change.
Nice. So it's a huge area. I think it's a huge area of change, and I think right off the bat, I think there are different kind of streams that you could look at. One is motivation to change, and two is the mechanisms by which change happens.
Okay.
Now you could actually look at how you would evaluate that change has happened as well.
Yeah.
That's also part of it. But that's more the evidence criteria, and I think that the starting point for change is probably, at least in my experience now, after sort of about 20 years of working with clients, it would be the motivation to change. And by that I mean getting to a point where something inside, there's some kind of like spark inside, there was something, some realization, some insight that, you know what, I want things to be different.
Yeah.
Now it's really important, because if you think about how change happens, there's probably sort of three ways you could look at it. You could, there's many ways you could look at it. The kind of the initiation of that motivation. The first thing is just getting to that point of enough is enough.
Yeah.
It's hitting rock bottom.
Yeah.
And that is definitely at a time tested sort of way. It works really well. In the sense that if you hit rock bottom and you make it through rock bottom, then there is motivation there that comes from the person. It's intrinsic. And so when I talk about motivation to change, I'm talking about intrinsic motivation, not extrinsic, because as far as I'm concerned, if change really happens once it comes from within, you can help create those circumstances, but it comes from within.
Intrinsic versus extrinsic is the difference between someone going, do you know what, I can't go on like this, and somebody else saying, you need to buck your ideas up.
You nailed it. And the reason that's important is, I think the reason it's really important to understand that is that we have this natural tendency, all of us, to a greater or lesser degree, to have psychological reactance. So I could give you an idea that is the best thing for you, that's going to change your life. But if it is presented in a way in which it is me presenting it to you as an authority figure, or you in some way feeling diminished by that exchange, that interaction, then it is natural to reject that. And you see it all the time in parent-child dynamics as well.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. It's presented externally, extrinsically. The tendency, the reactance, is the natural tendency at source to reject it. Now that's different from resistance. Psychological resistance is later on in the process. That's getting like challenges and bumps, which are to be expected.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's really interesting. So you've got that. First of all, the intrinsic motivation could come from hitting rock bottom. It could come from small wins, small kind of gradual success, what we call the law of successive approximations. You have one small success in one area, and then you take the next small step. So you're kind of taking baby steps and building on that. Another way, which is for sure one of the fastest ways to change, not always appropriate, it's not always ecologically appropriate, but it's one way to radically change your environment. And that could be the people you're hanging around, it could be the place you're in, it could just be the room you're in a house, it could be the company you're working for, the business you're working for, could be the line of work, could be the country that you're in.
Yeah.
And, because the environment is so powerful, and I think it often gets ignored. Sometimes when we're looking at models of change and thinking about it, if we, it's great to look at the person as a whole system, but that system is part of a wider system.
Sure. Yeah.
And so that is a strategy in which coaches, therapists can use to help a person change.
I suppose in this context, the thing we see most often is when people in addiction go to a residential rehab.
Yes.
So the environment fundamentally changes.
Yes.
And it's a safe environment. There are no drugs and alcohol there, and
Yes.
there's a supported, structured environment, and there are structured activities, therapeutic.
Yes.
But obviously, when people leave that, if they don't leave into
Exactly.
a supportive environment like this,
Yes.
then the relapse rate is 80-90%. It's colossal.
Definitely. And so that's really interesting. So exactly. So a temporary change of environment like that is not going to get what we want. The long term changes in some contexts. It can work for some people, like you say, the rate basically of falling back into things is quite high. So there are ways in which you can leverage the environment, shall we say, in the imagination. So let's say you have a challenge, and you want to, you have a problem. Could be addiction, could be a habit, could be a fear, could be something that you want to change. And you've made that. It's intrinsic. Well, a really good starting point is to recruit the environment to help that person make the change. So let me give you an example. Somebody comes in and says, I've got this anxiety. I feel really, I find it very difficult making friends or meeting people socially. Well, in terms of recruiting the environment, you can guide them gradually through a set of questions. Well, look, I get that. So if you were to make this change, what would be the smallest thing that your best friend would notice in you? What and get them to start considering that. What do you think? What would be the smallest thing that your father or your mother might notice? What's the smallest thing that the person you buy a cup of coffee from in the morning might notice in you as just the smallest sign you've started to change?
So you're getting that person to imagine what a more empowered future might look like.
Absolutely. Now, and you're exactly right. And I would not frame it as visualizing or getting them to do that, because my experience, if you say to somebody, can you picture your future, can you imagine it, can you look at it, some people are okay. I mean, I love visualization. However, most people experience performance anxiety, so you can do that very conversationally, gently. You will get the same results, but you won't be saying, you're not sort of it will what it will do is it'll go a step beyond. It will be using their imagination to start to mentalize, to what we call pre-vivify, or consider a future, a different future. But they will be considering that by using their imagination, having dissociated from themselves. So they're literally stepping out of their own current experience, because whilst they're in that experience, it's very difficult for them to consider something different. So the change mechanism, all change basically, we may talk about this later if we've got time, but there's 4 kind of steps that any kind of therapeutic pattern will go through, and we'll actually cycle through this a number of times. But in terms of getting that going, once you've got the intrinsic motivation, recruiting the environment is a very, very healthy thing to do. Now, if you once you get, shall we say, more comfortable with that, you can take it a step further with them, and this isn't like your gambit, so to speak, but it's okay. So, so Bob at the coffee shop would notice, that you've got a slight smile on your face. How would the sofa in your living room know that you've made a change? Now, that's a really mind-bending, hypnotic alteration of reality to, in essence, deep trance identified, to move out of yourself, to consider things from that perspective. It will stop somebody, literally stop them in their tracks. It's more kind of an extreme version of recruiting the environment. It's like, oh yeah, I guess I'd be sitting down there. My posture might be a little bit different. I think I might be feeling a little bit more comfortable inside myself. I might just, I think I'll probably just be feeling that, I've got this kind of comfortable support around me. And once you start having that, that is the point at which, at least in terms of the way that I work, will leverage that. So the moment you give me a resource, like you tell me you've got some comfort, or we can live, that's perfect, because we can expand on that and we can let that grow.
Sure.
So in that case, if you were to say to me through whatever mechanism, I think I'd start to, I'm not sure exactly, but I think I'd start to feel a little bit of comfort. I think I'd just feel a little bit more secure, a little bit more safe in my environment. And then you can just feed that back to them. So you'd start to feel a bit more safe and secure. So whereabouts in your body is that safety and security that you're feeling? So then people will tend to point. They'll generally have a sense. And they'll usually say, think about it, and I'm like, oh, sure, I kind of get a sense maybe about here. That's right. You can feel that sense of safety and comfort about here.
Yeah.
And is there anything else about that safety and comfort that you're feeling? And so we're creating little wedges. There are lots of different ways to do it. The recruiting environment is fine, but we're starting off with, so very quickly, we've got the motivation to change, and it's intrinsic. We can recruit the environment, we can use whatever's coming up, basically, in their experience.
Yeah.
And everyone, in my experiences, has resources and abilities that you can tap into.
Sure.
And it's just they haven't really reflected on it in this context. So they may love reading books, they may love going for walks, they may have a memory of a beautiful sunset one particular day. Any small thing like that can be used as an empowering resource to, in essence, dissolve the old problem when it's strategically harnessed, taken and expanded. And
it's rather similar, I suppose, to core belief work, where somebody says, well, I'm completely dislikable. No one could love me. So you look at the evidence for the evidence against those. So your friends at work, well, I suppose they like me. Right? And then, what is it you think they like about you? Oh, well, I'm quite funny. You're so funny person.
Absolutely. So you're finding in that case, so you can go directly and challenge help them challenge their own beliefs. You could use Byron Katie's work. You could use, there's a number of other ways in which you can, in essence, CBT, like sort of belief change, but to challenge the beliefs and help them find counterexamples. That's one way of doing things. I really like to take them to start off and see if we can start going in a direction which has enthusiasm, some excitement, some kind of. Well, they'll start to build up a future that for them feels highly worthwhile.
Yeah.
That feels beyond anything they would have considered before. Now, there's a number of sort of like you need to be aware if you're going to kind of do that you're going to run into a few things. One is you're going to have to go, you'll have to go with wherever they're at, and it might just be like a small step initially. The other thing is it's quite likely that will bring stuff up, because by virtue of starting to even consider something that has seemed so far out of their reach before, like somebody who's never had a loving partner, to do that, it's going to bring up anyway the old stuff that has been in the background, has probably brought them to your front door anyway. But you're right, absolutely. You can do that. It's another way to leverage the environment. These are, in essence, if you want to think about it, when we're leveraging the environment, what we're doing is we're leveraging parts of the unconscious. If you want to conceptualize it like that, they're in their mental schema. They've got the father, the mother, or two fathers or two husbands, whatever it is. Friends, folk in the community, and seeking to have a draw upon their sort of wisdom, their combined wisdom can be very, very beneficial. So absolutely.
Yeah. So we've talked about the initial stages of finding motivation. What are the most significant barriers that people face when they consider personal change in life?
Nice. Well, so there are a number of things. I would say the biggest change is, or the biggest challenge, to change is believing it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that is, and it's very interesting. So I had somebody who I've known for a very long time, actually, sort of best part of 20 years, who had never had a partner, but at the same time had insisted that was what they wanted, but refused to go out and meet anyone, refused to go dating. So there was clearly something going on there. Would have the same strategies as anyone else. There's lots of ways to go out and meet somebody, but they're getting on their life and nothing's happening, nothing's changed. And it's very interesting because we had a conversation, and the conversation went something like this. Well, there have been times in your life when you've had fun, you've been away, and you've had a really enjoyable time connecting with people of the opposite sex. I said, well, tell me about one of those. And he said, you know what? He said, it was fantastic. I was in Vegas and I was on this trip with organised abroad, and a big group of us there, which was so much fun. And we're there, and we're in the, and we're travelling around the States, we're visiting all these different places, and we stopped off, and we're just, I'm just there, and I'm just being myself. I'm laughing, and I'm just having the greatest amount of time. There's the two airline stewardesses, and I'm teasing them both mercilessly, and they are, the more I talk, the more they're laughing, the more they do, the more we're just developing this real close connection. And so we explored this for a while. And so now, and he had there were lots of other friends, lifelong friends who made on this particular trip. It was a really, really wonderful experience. And so, in essence, as we explored that, he started to feel that more and more. And I said, well, look, it's interesting when you think about your situation now and what you want to do. How does that feel different? He said, you know what? I said, yeah. Actually, I know I can do it. I know this can be a lot of fun. What about? He said, you know what? And I've just booked on this 2-day course, which was, I don't know, some kind of a kind of personal development course. And so the next thing goes away, and a couple of weeks later, he comes back and says, I did that course, and in that course, I had to sit with somebody and look them in the eye. And the moment I did, all these emotions came up that I've never had before. It was completely intense, and ever since then, I felt completely at peace. I completely know this is handled, and I just know that and I've met somebody there I really like, and you know what, we're just going to go out for coffee and hang out. And so I tell that story because most of the time, in my experience, when a person has a problem, they have areas where they are doing very well, or they have the necessary resource there. It's just they have not got access to it in the current context in which they want to achieve something. And in this case, we didn't need to go into the big sort of therapeutic thing, of necessarily going down the route of how's your grandma and how's your mum, and how did it, what was the greatest sort of challenge when your gran died when you were 11. And there is great validity for going down that route. It's just that by building up and finding the times where naturally a person feels resourceful, feels alive, feels empowered, where it's not a question of they know they can do it. The belief is their belief in their ability to do that, it's not even a question because they've already done it.
So by taking them back, taking your friend back through that journey and
Sure.
the trip to Vegas, you help him to construct a sort of like a model, a model of similarity.
Yes.
Where you can say, well, you sort of did these things,
Yes.
which is, I guess, a bit like being on a date.
Exactly. Now that's great, and you're doing that without saying it. And
Yes.
that's different. So
Because you're giving it to him to do the problem solving.
absolutely perfect, and I really like that. I really like the way that you phrase that, Nick. Actually, the problem solving.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. If you look at, if we take a completely separate field, we look at negotiation skills. Really good negotiators who are playing it sort of win-win with the highest kind of like intention and good of all in mind. They are going to get the person they're with to solve problems along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to say, well, look, if you go ahead with this deal, how are you going to sort of, how are you going to, manage payments? How are you going to do this? How are you going to sell it to your board when you go back? How are you going to do this? And that person is going to solve problems for themselves in advance. So when it comes to making a decision, they can actually do it. And you're exactly right. In this case, by what we call revivifying, by re-experiencing and experience as though they were back there with enough of that energy. So it's what we call hypermnesia, with experiencing it with enough emotional intensity, to the point where you're seeing what you were seeing when you were there, you're feeling what you're feeling, you're naturally starting to remember a lot of details there, and then bringing that back and considering the problem state, if you will, then absolutely, it implicitly, the unconscious mind makes these generalizations. It goes, oh, I see.
That's like that.
That is like that, absolutely. And that's a beautiful way. So it's a really beautiful way that you say that. There's problem solving going on, but the problem solving is going on inside the inside the mind of the person you're with.
Yeah.
And that's why when they go there, they say, it feels good. At that point, sometimes you just need to help them join up the dots a little bit, but the more you can help them do that for themselves. So in this case, you might say something like, well, that's great. So you go into this thing next week. How do you think you're going to feel different going into this environment? Oh, I'm really looking forward to it. And I can do this and I can do that. You say, oh, great. And how do you think feeling this way is going to help you make new choices in your life? And now they're explaining to you how their belief systems, their values, their actions, their day-to-day life is changing as a result of that, and it's coming from them. Again, it's intrinsic.
If we talk about belief, I mean, here in working in the field of addiction, belief is how people generate, obviously, meaning. So if you have somebody who goes to a party, they feel nervous, they feel they have to have an alcoholic drink in order to relax, they are ascribing a particular value to alcohol.
Yes.
And they're giving it a meaning.
Yes.
That it may or may not have. In the case of someone that's got a problem with alcohol, it's not going to help them relax. It's actually going to cause all sorts of chaos.
Sure.
When you see people who have gone really deep into recovery, they re-enter the same scenario, say 6 months later. Say, I was at a party, I just, the urge to drink seems absurd. Why would I want to do that? And the reason why they're having this experience, I presume, is because the belief that they need something external to themselves to fix how they feel.
Yes.
And the belief and the meaning that they ascribe to alcohol has changed.
Yes. Perfect.
So it just doesn't make sense. Like, I wouldn't have a wine glass full of toilet duck,
Absolutely. So, and this is, this kind of quite advanced territory here, but I really like that. So, when I was asked to contribute some stuff for the book, I thought, well, what can I for the journeys, and what can I do that the coaching field can really benefit from? And frames of reference and metaphors from hypnotherapy, from neurolinguistic programming are just so core and fundamental. The whole metaphor thing is really kind of, we've already kind of touched on that really with, the experience in Vegas was the metaphor for change. Yeah. And we don't need to spell that out. The unconscious mind works through analogy, and basically that is how we learn. Okay. And then frames are just that frame of reference. The frame of reference is the way in which we construct meaning. Now, I've had a lot of people talk about frames over the years, and one of the things for me was I've just been for years looking at ways to try and simplify and explain that and understand it, conceptualize it. And if you think about that frame of reference as fundamentally the meaning, okay, and the frame in which you view a particular situation or an aspect of a situation will typically have assumptions. There'll be invisible kind of like presuppositions. There will be things in there that have been unquestioned. So you can think about them as beliefs, thoughts, other constructs.
And people mistake beliefs and truths, don't they?
Absolutely, absolutely, for sure. They're not even aware of that these are assumptions there. Absolutely. And then there's the other aspect, which is, who's in the environment, who's there, who's not there, when it's happening, when it's not happening, how something is happening in the environment. All of this combined together to create the particular frame, the way in which I'm experiencing that, which contributes to the meaning. And you're right, fundamentally, what we are looking to do with change is to transform meaning. We're looking to transform meaning. And it really is amazing, because somebody can be in pretty crappy life circumstances, but if they find some empowering meaning in that, I think of the classics on man's search for meaning. If you find some meaning within that, and if you look at some of the people who've survived concentration camps and other things, they have done. I was reading a fascinating story the other day, along similar lines, where it's a guy at sea, and they were at sea for something like 87 days. They managed to survive without kind of the usual things that you would have at sea. There were some people who died and some who didn't. And the people who survived on that, in fact, some of them actually ended up, I think they survived, got to land, and then they were in a prisoner of war camp for several months as well. But the people who survived, in their minds, went through this process where they were imagining, okay, I've come back from the war, I've come back from this situation, what am I going to be doing? Okay, I'm going to hug my family, I'm going to take them out for lunch, okay, what kind of meal am I going to make them when I come back? Okay, I'm going to go down to the market, I'm going to get this, and I'm going to chop it up. And they're going through and they're starting to imagine over and over and again those things they're doing. They're giving themselves meaning, which I guess part of that meaning is there's going to be in some ways a future orientation in some aspect of it. But they're going through it, they've got some meaning. There are things to live for, I know I can do this. All this, that kind of the belief is being built into that. The expectation is being built into that. And the body will respond. It's very, very strange. We still don't understand the mechanism of sleep. Okay, there are lots of things we don't understand. All we know is that, and these are, so I guess maybe a little bit, I guess you say cruel experiments, but experiments they have done on mice and rodents is you deprive them of sleep, they die. And they don't know why. Everything else, all the organs, everything else is fine, the brain's fine, but you get deprived of sleep, and there are problems. So, once you use your mind and your body in the right way and look after it in the right way, once you get it to imagine things, there's a huge visceral response that your body, some kind of your internal energy, your internal abilities can get tapped into. And I really like your description of it as meaning, and that meaning you can create in different ways. We can work with it as the reason I mentioned a kind of a model of thinking about those assumptions and thinking about what else creates that context that creates that overall frame of reference of meaning, is that then you have something very specific way in which you can filter yourself as a therapist or coach for what's going on in the situation in front of you, and that's fundamental.
So belief is this kind of, or difficulties around belief is a difficulty about change. Would you say that that's kind of, a large 80% of the struggle is about helping people to believe in the possibility of change and to be able to visualize not visualize, but to conceive of the empowered outcome?
Yeah, I mean, it's let me see how I could explain it, and then I'll see if that maps back onto what you're saying. I suppose the way I conceptualize it is every person has within them the seeds of magnificence, and if we boil it down very simplistically, they're going through one of three sets of kind of like identities rotating. Now, there's lots of ways you can look at this, and this is a real simplification, but just in terms of like when I'm meeting somebody or interacting with somebody who may be looking to make a change. But it's a useful these are useful metaphors. They're either embracing themselves as a victim, as a villain because of mistakes that they've made, or a hero identity. Now the thing is, all of us, including me, play all those roles at different times. We've all been the villain, we've all done things we think, I wish I hadn't done that. And then there's the victim, which is, well, I can't do this, and I'm terrible, and and we can all go into that. And the heroes, you can be something as small as, your partner's got a flat tire and the person who comes and saves the day. It could be, hugging your kid and reassuring. But there are loads of times in our life when we've done that. And so when I'm with somebody, I'm going to, in my mind, I am going to focus on them as the hero. And I'm going to help them to experience more of that identity in their life, which means that they are going to start telling me about either the victimhood or the villain, guaranteed, at some point. And they're probably going to be very well used to that. They're going to have well rehearsed it. They're going to, and it's because, like you mentioned before, they assume that is fact, okay, that narrative is fact. And if I was to try and say, oh, no, that's not you. You're a good bloke. You're a good lass. Or you're a good person.
And the core belief fortress inside, with all its guns pointed out.
Exactly. It's
He's
just
lying to you. He doesn't know you.
Exactly. I've blown it.
Yeah.
I've going like that. I've done it. I've totally blown it. So what I'm looking to do is initially I will take the thing I take the most seriously is building rapport up with them, and means accepting them where they are, but also looking for those little wedges. It's like this is terrible. That's terrible. But but I went to a concert this week. Oh, right, well, tell me about that. So now I'm just going to say, well, I've always loved Paul Weller. Tell me a bit more about that. Now, if you can see anything where you can see the physiology change, the smile, everything else, you have to make it a resource there, because when you drill into it, say, well, look, what does Paul, do you mind me asking you? You mentioned Paul Weller a couple of times. I'm thinking of somebody, a particular friend of mine who's a huge fan. What does Paul Weller mean to you? Yeah. Well, you know what? There was a time in my life, when I was like in university in my final year, and I don't know, my housemates were a bit rubbish, and Stanley Road had just come out, and there I was sitting in this room with like a friend of mine who come to do a master's, and we were there and we put that on, and I just thought, that song just came in, and I came to life, and it just made me realise how much, just how much richness there is in life. Oh, that's right. Yeah, how much richness there is in life. Tell me a bit more about that richness. What kind of richness is that richness? Now you can start expanding that out. You've taken the time, you're filtering for the hero identity, the time when something magnificent has happened, there's been a nobility in their life, a joyful experience, a happy experience, and you're expanding on that. And it's very, very powerful for a person. They will go back into that experience very quickly.
Yeah. And as you're pacing alongside them and mirroring back to them, you're essentially validating that experience. That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely. You're validating that experience, and inside of that validation is a re-experiencing of that experience, because all too often what happens is people who, you see this, just sort of day to day. Somebody says, oh, my neighbour, threw something over the fence and shouts at me, poor thing. Right. So now that person treats them as a victim. Oh, poor thing. You have such a terrible time all the time. Now, what that person is doing is they want to be there for the other person, but they're completely mistaking sympathy for empathy. And a brief bit of empathy for sure, and all fun of that. But really, treating somebody as a victim does not serve them. Let me give you probably the most extreme example of this. And I mention this because this is the role, I think this is probably one of the core invisible, unspoken roles that we can use to help manifest change in our environment that will almost seem like magic once you adopt this. almost. And here's what it is. So there was a study done, and this is, going back, it's probably about 20 years ago when this was published. I might find the exact reference if I might even be longer, probably back in the 90s. This was in Israel, and it was with some of the core elite folks and some of the defence forces out there. And they basically got them into a training camp. So let's say they got 100 people, and these are the crack people that are military strategists. These are people they're used to being in battle. They're very good. The psychologist set up a study, and we probably wouldn't do a study like this now. But anyway, the way they did the study was they told the people who were evaluating, they basically made up histories about the people who were there. And they randomly said that all these people were equally brilliant, but they randomly said that half the people were just a bit substandard, the other half were brilliant. Okay, and the psychologists and various people who were there in the background, they were independently monitoring this. They knew that there was basically no difference between them. They go through these 8 weeks, 10 weeks of real kind of arduous kind of tests. At the end of it, the people who it was really crazy. The average score that was given for people who were told who they believed to be brilliant up front was up here. The average score for people who believed were a bit substandard was down here. A massive, massive difference. The psychologists, now here's the rub, the psychologists go at this point and say, we'll be doing a study here. Just to let you know, and they're all the same, because we don't want to affect anyone when they go back into their ranks, go back into active service. And the people who were evaluating, who should we say had been hoodwinked at the beginning, refused to believe the psychologists.
Wow.
Okay, and that is how powerful the Pygmalion effect is. Mm-hmm. It's so powerful, and so I kind of, ever since I came across that study, for me as in my coaching practice, just with my friends, other people in life, I could summarize it in the vernacular. Don't buy into their bullshit. But I'm going to believe that they are more than they think they are. I'm going to believe that you're more than you're capable of. And so I'm going to believe that. It's simply a question of perspective.
Yeah. Because
there are times in all our lives when we could be going through the greatest problems, but we're that tired, we completely forget about them. Or a favourite TV show comes on, and we completely forget about it. So I know that you have capability of at least stepping outside of that problem temporarily. I also know that you have times in your life when your resource. I mean, let's face it, both of us are alive here now. So whatever problems we've had in our life, we've got to have had some resources. We've got to have had a few breaks along the way, and we must have had at least somebody who gave us some love and nurturing along the way. We might not have consciously recognised all those points, but it's there. Yeah. And so if you take that as a powerful frame of reference, a belief, a kind of thing to internalise inside you, I think you can really empower other people in terms of the change that you're giving.
Yeah.
Because your non-verbal communication, your paraverbal communication, all your communication is going to be signalling, you can handle this.
And it's about, that example of the Israeli Defence Force has a lot to say about how other people can positively and negatively shape a reality. So when people are in a kind of very receptive or a trance state, I suppose, I think the classic example is if you're kind of at home making a cup of tea and the double glazing salesman appears on your doorstep, and he's already planned a kind of almost like a psychological offensive to say, how did you know? Did you know that your double glazing is all wrong? And is it really? Oh shit! No, what am I going to do? Well, I've got a solution for you. Very quickly, impulse you to a decision. Bang, down, and you're £3,000 out the door. And somebody, it's possible for others to kind of create realities in which we inhabit. And really, is this the case? Those are the better people, and I'm in the inferior group. The interesting part of the study there is that the assessors didn't believe the reality at the end, and that's how powerful. Because of course they were receiving, I suppose, false feedback from the experiment.
Absolutely.
Because as some soldiers felt themselves to be inferior, they performed as inferiors.
Well, I'll just stop you. So basically, the soldiers didn't know anything.
Oh right.
So basically, in this study, so just to be, you had the soldiers who just were told, you come here, this is like, you're the best of the best, you just come in, we're just running through some routine tests. So that's all they knew. And then you had the group of people, then you had the psychologists, and in between, you had the people who were doing the assessments, who the psychologists are looking for. How are they going to filter based on their beliefs? So there was no difference. There was no difference at all in France. Now, because I guess these people were not, the people who were assessing were not directly involved in it. If they were I suppose you added extra layers of complexity if they start getting involved in it, because a similar example is if this is a really nice. They've done it a number of times with children, and these are lovely states. These studies from America. You get the kids who are really struggling. Yeah. And they tell the teachers, new teachers come in, the psychologists, the people running the study, the researchers say that these kids, these are good kids, right? These are the cream of the cream. That's all they tell them. And the study runs at the end of the year, those kids that were failing, that were, had been identified previously as trouble kids, now all of a sudden they're getting A grades. They are not those dyslexic kids, but they have transformed into the unconscious expectations, as reflected probably in the decisions, the little micro movements, the extra little bit of attention, the extra bit of warmth, the way that the environment is being structured differently for them by the person in authority there. And these things are super subtle, and it's these super subtleties that will fundamentally make the difference. And that's why your skin will crawl. You'll know the person who comes to your door to try and do something. A part of you just knows that our bullshit detectors come on. We know that something is remiss here. So I really kind of advocate strongly, less for myself as much as anything, is to have that kind of like a general belief that people are capable of more than they think they are consciously. Yeah. How do I know that? Well, your conscious mind can, let's say, between 5 and 9 pieces of information they like to say you can be aware of at one time. I just like to think generally, us guys, it's like 1 or 2 things. It's fine, right? Yeah. Unconsciously, well, we know that we have so much more in there. We know we've learnt at least 1 language, including the implicit rules of grammar. Well, we know how to walk and talk. Well, where is that information? It's not held in our conscious mind, is it? It's held somewhere else. All the information in your books that you've read, Nick. All the experiences and memories in your life. So we know there is so much more in there, and we're able to do these things. We're able to do them without thinking about it.
And most of the things you've described today have been about creating the resourceful states where one can access these things. Now, before we finish, I want to talk about The Journey Inside, available in all good bookshops.